We did talk about Bretton Woods. That's fine. Okay. Starting 1973, once Bretton Woods was no longer because U.S. got out of gold standard. Basically, everybody was on their own. IMF members met in Jamaica, and they put a new set of rules. And of course, it was called Jamaica Agreements. Flexible exchange rates were declared acceptable. Central banks had a right to intervene into markets if there were some big moves that they didn't necessarily like. Gold was officially abandoned as an international reserve asset. Non-oil exporting countries and less developed countries have now more access to IMF funds. IMF kind of acted as a almost lender of last resort for countries because if as a bank I lend to you and you don't pay me back, I can sue you, right? Suppose you lent money to the government of Brazil. Yeah, there was a coup as there were a lot of them in 70s and 80s. The government changed and they said, we're not paying you anymore. What are you going to do as a bank? Other than hiring a private army and collecting, there isn't much you can do. So especially for riskier countries, private markets were not necessarily available. So IMF kind of acted as a lender of last resort. And typically those loans, so-called IMF programs, they came with a lot of conditions. They said, okay, you have serious balance of payments issues. If we don't lend you money, there's going to be big time political and economic upheaval in your country. And depending upon the country, that could also create contagions. I mean, think about it. Let's say your government of DP, DRC, Democratic Republic of Congo. The old name is Zaire, also known as Belgian Congo, because until 1960 they were a Belgian colony. And suppose there's a big time economic upheaval. That's not going to stay limited with that country. I mean, it has borders with South Africa, Zambia, Zimbabwe. Who else is on top? I think Cameroon, the other Republic of Congo, so on and so forth. That means there's going to be regional issues, wars. Of course, war is never good for business unless you're in the business of selling arms. Are there any Star Trek fans here? You know the Ferengi rules of acquisitions? Not, I mean, not all of them, but Ferengi is the species that are effectively a caricaturized version of the robber barons of late 1800s, early 1900s of US, hardcore capitalists. And they have these rules by which they live. And one of those rules is war is good for business. And next rule is peace is good for business. Also, there's another rule. A debt is not a debt unless it's a debt. A contract is not a contract unless it's a contract with a Ferengi. Or another, this one I love. It's number 76. Every once in a while, declare peace. It confuses the hell out of your enemies. I use that in my personal life. I can attest that it works. Uh, so IMF actually gave them loans, but it said they're going to give you all this money, not all of it immediately. There's going to be an availability like a line of credit, but you have to take these economic uh, measures. Doesn't always work, but that was kind of the idea. And once flexible exchange rate regime started, suddenly there were big time volatilities in the value of US dollar against other currencies. And until from 64 to until about 72, this is kind of a index. The higher is the index, the more valuable is US dollar. Uh, there wasn't that much variation. Once the Bretton Woods collapsed, US dollar started losing value. In fact, one of the reasons French attacked the gold standard, because under normal circumstances, with all the trade deficit or current account deficit US had, US dollar should have been devalued, which meant, if you sold dollars and bought gold at $35, you should have made money. As soon as it collapsed, of course, they made money on that. Somebody in 1991 did something similar. That's where he made most of his money. Um, we're going to talk about that, but there was something called European monetary system. This was before Euro, where the countries in European Union had their currencies against each other, move in a very narrow band. And George Soros recognized that British pound was not tenable in that range. He shorted British pound for $2 billion, 2 billion pounds, which was a lot of money those days. Now junior traders have $2 billion positions, but in 1990, 91, that was a big position. Of course, pound collapsed and Soros made over $1 billion in that trade, £1 billion. After that, he made more money from other things. And until about late 80s, US dollar lost value. Then starting 1980, and growth that came with two things. A, the oil embargoes had ended, the oil crises of 73 and 78, and the growth restarted with the decrease in interest rates starting 1981 or so. US dollar actually uh, went up quite a bit. This is 1986. There was an agreement called Plaza Agreement. Uh, Fed wasn't too happy that US dollar was that valuable. That means you're basically losing competitive advantage. Countries like at that point Japan, Germany had a lot of competitive advantage in trades. So German and Japanese goods were able to command lower prices. That meant bad things, especially for US automakers. So they made an agreement with all the major central banks and they actually intervened in the markets. That started a decline in the value of US dollar. This is early 90s, so-called the Loo Accord and tech boom. This is the 2008 global financial crisis and so on and so forth. Okay? So it's very volatile. That obviously is not good for trade business, because in general business, because whether you're involved in foreign trade or not, you are exposed to foreign exchange price risk. That always has a cost. Even when you manage it, it has a cost. Uh, there are different types of exchange rates arrangements countries make. Some of them seem to say, the hell with it. We're not going to have our own currency. You know, uh, Ecuador, El Salvador, and Panama, they actually use US dollar as currency. Panama had been doing that for a while because they've been involved with US through the Panama Canal Zone since early 20th century. But El Salvador came in later. Ecuador did the same thing after some financial crises at the end of, I think, 97, if I'm not mistaken. Some countries do something called currency board. In spirit, it is similar to gold standard in the sense that under gold standard, you have to have any new money issued backed by gold if you're going to fix the exchange rate. This basically says it has to be fully backed by US dollars or any other major reserve currency, typically currencies like US dollar, euro, Swiss franc, especially, Japanese yen are thought of as, and British pound to some extent, major reserve currencies. And it's, again, almost like gold standard among countries that does that. Hong Kong is one of them, not Hong Kong. Bulgaria is another one. The Sultanate of Brunei. They have a lot of oil income, so they don't worry about stuff anyway. But Bulgaria had issues with that because when 2008 crisis happened, uh, in order for you to be